Is there a connection between Pope Francis's upcoming Year of Mercy and his recent appointments to the Synod on the Family? And what of the Pope's reform agenda? Editor-in-Chief of the CatholicThing.org, Robert Royal, and Rome correspondent of the National Catholic Register, Edward PENTIN, will join us. And later, we'll remember the life of our friend and colleague, Father Richard John Neuhaus, with his biographer, Randy BOYAGODA. And finally, the market goes up, the market goes down, and where will those interest rates go? George SCHWARTZ, founder of the Ave Maria Mutual Funds, joins us to offer some investment advice, which we can all use. Lots to cover. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over, and a happy St. Joseph's Day. The fastest hour on air and a stellar lineup tonight. Robert Royal, Edward PENTIN from Rome, Randy BOYAGODA, and George SCHWARTZ are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo, and I'll be live tweeting throughout the show. Or drop us an email. I'm at worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. After Tuesday's big election victory, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu now appears to be backing off of his pre-election opposition to a Palestinian state. On Thursday, he told MSNBC he wants a sustainable, peaceful two-state solution if circumstances change. He also told Fox News that he has not retracted any of the things he said in a speech 6 years ago, when he called for a solution in which a demilitarized Palestinian state recognizes a Jewish state. In light of his pre-election comments, the White House has indicated that President Barack Obama will seek to bypass Israeli negotiations for a two-state solution and instead turn to the United Nations to press Israel on the matter. And the Islamic State is taking responsibility for the deadly attack on Tunisia's National Bardo Museum, which left 23 people dead and at least 40 wounded. Two men armed with assault rifles gunned down tourists exiting buses on Wednesday. The attackers then charged inside the museum to take hostages before being killed by security forces. In a statement, ISIS describes Wednesday's attack as, quote, a blessed invasion of one of the dens of infidels and a vice in Muslim Tunisia, end quote. Pope Francis sent a telegram addressed to the Archbishop of Tunis, Ilario Antoniazzi, offering prayers for the victims. He called the attack an act against peace and the sacredness of human life. The Holy Father went on to assure the families and the victims of those affected of his continued prayers. Pakistani Christians are mourning the victims of a pair of church bombings in Lahore. 17 people were killed, another 70 were wounded on Sunday. According to reports, congregants blocked the two suicide bombers from entering the churches during Mass, saving many lives while sacrificing their own. On Monday, as many as 10,000 Pakistani Christians took to the streets in protest, forcing public transportation services to shut down and blocking a major thoroughfare. The faithful denounced the attacks and the lack of government protection from terrorists. In Rome, Pope Francis remembered the victims, praying that, quote, the persecution against Christians, which the world tries to hide, might end. And in a shift for the Vatican, the Holy See is acknowledging the need for military intervention against ISIS. The Vatican ambassador to the UN in Geneva presented a joint statement to the Human Rights Council stipulating the need for, as a last resort, military intervention against the Islamic State. Archbishop Silvano Tomasi told the Catholic news agency that the statement, signed by nearly 70 nations, first attempts to foster a new diplomatic approach in order to protect communities from ISIS. The use of military force, he said, is a very last choice. The statement is also significant, according to the Archbishop, because this is the first time the Human Rights Council is acknowledging Christians as a persecuted group. A quick United Nations side note, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon announced that Pope Francis will address the General Assembly on September 25th in New York. You can count on EWTN News to bring you live and complete coverage of the Pope's visit from New York, Washington, and Philly as it unfolds. And after several weeks of military victories against Boko Haram, Nigeria has announced that its coalition force has begun a final onslaught against the jihadist group. Soldiers from Niger and Chad have retaken a key town near Nigeria's border with Niger. This is part of a regional campaign to wrest back control of northeastern Nigeria from the Islamic militants. In heavy fighting, 222 jihadis were killed and 1 soldier from Niger died, according to officials. The apparent victories are a remarkable turn of events in what's been a 6-year insurgency by Boko Haram. There is still no word on the fate of the more than 200 schoolgirls kidnapped by Boko Haram almost a year ago. Back here in the U.S., Republican businessman and reality television star Donald Trump announced plans Wednesday to form a presidential exploratory committee. Trump has been talking about running for president since the 1980s, but this bid appears to be serious. Trump said he has not renewed his NBC contract for The Apprentice, and he's already putting political teams in place in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, which hosts the first 3 presidential contests. He was in New Jersey, or rather New Hampshire, on Thursday. Never short on self-assurance, the Donald said, "I am the only one who can make America truly great again." Trump is the second major GOP candidate to form an exploratory committee. Retired neurosurgeon Dr. Ben Carson did so earlier this month. And a new study shows that euthanasia deaths in Belgium have more than doubled in the last 6 years. They account for nearly 1 out of every 20 deaths in that country. The universities of Ghent and Brussels, which oversaw the research, found a growing acceptance of euthanasia since it was legalized in 2002. Given the findings, Ghent University professor Freddie Mortier warns that euthanasia could be an option for health systems with financial shortfalls, like those in America.
When I talk to American physicians, American patients, they are afraid, they are inclined to think that they may be forced or in some way coerced into the option of euthanasia. And I think that given the way in which healthcare is functioning in the United States, that they may be right.
In a related story, France's lower house has approved legislation that would allow deep, continuous sedation until death for patients facing terminal illness. By a vote of 436 to 34, the National Assembly approved the bill. Some lawmakers not voting for the measure said it amounted to legalized euthanasia in disguise. And a Catholic family-owned and operated company has won its lawsuit against the federal government and the HHS mandate. On Monday, Hercules Industries won a permanent injunction from the U.S. District Court in Colorado. The judge ruled that the plaintiffs were protected by the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993. Now, that act forbids the government from placing a substantial burden on the free exercise of religion for a compelling government interest. In the Hobby Lobby case last June, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the act protects certain companies with objections to the mandate. Under the healthcare law, Hercules Industries was forced to provide free coverage for contraceptives, including abortifacients and sterilizations. Hercules founder and co-owner William Newland said the victory has, quote, taught our family that we've been right to put God first and to protect our right to live and work according to our faith. Spiritual treasures come before business tools, end quote. As expected, controversy marched down Fifth Avenue at New York's St. Patrick's Day parade. For the first time, a gay contingent of marchers was allowed to take part in the parade while Timothy Cardinal Dolan served as Grand Marshal. The Cardinal was petitioned by thousands of Catholics to withdraw from the parade after organizers agreed to permit an NBC-affiliated LGBT group to march under its own banner. At the same time, several pro-life groups were denied the right to march. When announced last year, Cardinal Dolan said the inclusion of the LGBT group was a wise decision. On Tuesday, he attempted to stay above the fray.
I'm glad everybody's welcome here. All the no distinction. They're all welcome, and I'm glad they are. It's a great day of unity and happiness and joy.
The joy was not shared by many gay activists who again protested the parade for only allowing one gay group to march up Fifth Avenue. Also on Tuesday, the mainline Presbyterian Church in the United States approved the celebration of same-sex marriages. In a final vote, more than 2/3 of the church's regional bodies agreed to redefine marriage, or the marriage bond, in its worship book. It will no longer read as the union of a man and a woman, but as the union of two people. With 1.7 million members, the Presbyterian USA denomination is the largest Protestant group in the U.S. to back gay marriage. The United Church of Christ was the first to do so in 2005. And the Chinese government appears to have no interest in the latest Vatican suggestion regarding the selection of bishops. Vatican spokesman Father Federico Lombardi said during a Hong Kong television interview that the Holy See was willing to consider bishop candidates who had been pre-screened by the communist regime. This would be similar to an arrangement the Holy See has with Vietnam. In response, the Chinese Foreign Minister Hong Li said the government desires improved relations, but urged the Vatican to face the historical tradition and reality of Catholics in China. Currently, all bishop ordinations are considered illicit, and the clerics are selected by the government. It's been a theme heavily accented throughout his pontificate. Now Pope Francis has declared a special Jubilee year of mercy. The Holy Father announced the extraordinary Jubilee this past week. He said the Holy Year of Mercy is an opportunity for the Church to make clear its mission of being a witness to mercy. The year will begin December 8th and run through November 20th of 2016, not quite a year. We'll look at the significance of this year of mercy and the pontificate of Pope Francis, as well as the Synod, in our next segment. And finally, on a lighter note, and a needed one, it appears the Holy Father was a bit of a party animal in his youth. Francis's best friends, Oscar and Alberto de Arezzo, spoke to the Daily Mail. Now, they reveal the pontiff was part of a gang of boys called the 10 Muchachos, who would try to pick up girls at dances and had some unforgettable house parties. Recalling one such party, Oscar says they raided his sister's wardrobe and all dressed up in women's clothes. I put on a cloak to be Zorro, he said, and Alberto and Jorge, the Pope, dressed up as women. They had no makeup, so they painted their faces with burned cork. Asked if the Holy Father ever had a sweetheart, his best friends say there was only one contender, but Jorge was already feeling a call to the priesthood and very likely figured nothing would come of that relationship. Oscar, Alberto, and Pope Francis are still friends today. When we return, Robert Royal and the National Catholic Register's Vatican correspondent Edward Pentin will explore Pope Francis's latest moves and what they really mean. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. Pope Francis named the consultors for this year's Synod on the Family. He also declared a Holy Year of Mercy to begin immediately following the much-anticipated October Synod. All the while, the Holy Father is taking deliberate steps to reform the Curia in Rome. Here to make sense of it all and to put it in much-needed context, we're joined in studio by Robert Royal, the editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org. And from Rome, by Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward Pentin. Thank you both for being here. Robert, I want to start with you. The Pope said in recent days he anticipates a short pontificate, 2 to 3 years. I always said this was a 5-year pontificate.
I know.
Yeah, I know, but I was kind of quiet about it.
You're a prophet.
I'm not really, but it seems that way as time goes on. Here's my question. John Allen and others have said this is a political ploy by the Pope to galvanize his supporters so they realize time is short, and to sort of put his opponents at bay, make them think, this is going to be over soon. Your take on all of that?
Well, it might be true. That's my take. I have a feeling we're getting to the point where we're overreading the Pope a little bit. He's actually a relatively simple man, and I think some of the problems he's stumbled into are because he's a relatively simple man, and he gets put in circumstances where he says things that send out diverse messages. Yeah. But in this particular case, it seems to me that he's just raising the possibility that it could be a short papacy. He says, I felt that.
Right.
He isn't asserting that that's going to be the case. He was careful to say, I don't want to say that I'm going to resign as Benedict did at 85 or whatever, because then it gives the impression of the papacy as a lame duck sort of operation, and people are just going to wait him out. So he's been careful about this, but I think a lot of people hearing him are so surprised that a pope is even talking about these things that they tend to overread the statements.
Edward Pentin, are we reading too much into this? And is this in any way tied, that pronouncement by the Pope that his pontificate may be abbreviated either by his own hand or by God's? Is this a way to continue his reforms at the Vatican and blunt some of the resistance he's been encountering?
I agree with Robert that we could perhaps read too much into this. I think he probably was just giving a straight answer to a straight question, but it's very difficult to read this Pope, as everyone knows, and to know exactly where he wants to go and what his intentions are. But I think he has left open the possibility, I think, clearly of resigning like Pope Benedict. And although he hasn't said he wants to do that, I think his admiration for Benedict for doing that, I think, points to him seriously contemplating doing it himself.
Edward, you wrote a blockbuster of a piece that didn't get enough attention, and I'm going to Facebook it again and send it out, where you reported on the consultors, the 11 consultors that the Pope has appointed to this Synod on the family. What do they tell us? Who are these people? Well,
the subject of the piece that I wrote is the Synod Secretariat stacking the deck. Because as we know, last Synod, it was kind of overweighted towards the sort of pro-Cardinal Casper side. And as we know, Cardinal Baldassarre, the Secretary General of the Synod of Bishops, is a great supporter of the Casper proposal. He's quite open about saying this. So clearly he's...
And we should tell people, Edward,
the Casper
proposal, the Casper proposal is that divorced and remarried Catholics should get a fast pass, if you will, to communion. That they shouldn't have to go through an annulment process, or they should get some kind of quickie, once over by the parish priest, and they could, the second wife and the guy could go to communion. So continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yes, no, that's right. And clearly, if you look at the backgrounds of the other consultors, yes, there is one professor from the John Paul II Institute, who wasn't there last year. There was no representative of the faculty at the Synod last year. But the rest of them are all very much of a sort of Casperian background, and so there is concern there that he's again trying to manipulate the proceedings and make sure that this agenda, if you like, goes through. But whether how much control, how much power or influence rather that these consultants have is not clear. I'm trying to find that out, but certainly in the preparation of the Synod, they're going to have some say in it.
Interesting. Robert Royal, your analysis of this, I mean, what are we seeing here? Is this stacking the deck, and are we preordaining the Casper solution as the answer?
It would appear that that's the case. I think Edward's got this exactly right. However, it's an open question for me how much the Pope actually pays attention to the details of the structuring of these synods. I think what happened in the last one, and there are, of course, different ways of reading what happened in last October's Synod, is that as he often does in his public life, I think he begins a process and then he lets it go to see where it's going to wind up. And even when that very controversial midterm report came out. He read it, he returned it to them, and he made no changes.
No, he approved that.
Yeah, he wanted that process to go forward. So I don't know if he's the one who's actually made these selections or they've been recommended to him, which I have a feeling is what's happening. And it raises the whole question of the curial reform that's going on, which seems to be doing well in terms of financial reform. How much the reform is internal about other matters is not clear to me. And I was just in Rome 2 weeks ago. In fact, I met with Edward, and we had a good conversation together. And I constantly hear that from many friends who are reporters and just observers and sometimes participants in various offices, that they hear about these reforms, they don't know themselves very concretely what they mean. And it seems that there is some group, not necessarily Francis himself, who seems to be driving the car.
Edward Pentin, there was also the Italian government recently passed a bill that legalizes quickie divorces in Italy. Is this seen somehow as a tell of where this Synod on the Family could go in October?
Well, it does seem rather interesting. I mean, this was a bill that was passed yesterday in the Senate. It still has to go through the House again, but it's going to be approved. And it does rather point to, I don't know if there is a connection, but I wrote about it today, that they're trying to streamline the annulments process. This is Pope Francis's view. This is what he wants to do. It's also very much the sort of Casparian thing too, is to streamline the annulments process and make it easier for people. You could almost draw a parallel there with the quickie divorces in Italy. Of course, it's very different, the annulments and divorce, but they're often perceived as rather similar. So there is that connection being made there, which is rather interesting, I think.
I want to give both of you a chance at this. I'll start with you, Edward. The Pope declared this special Jubilee year of mercy, and it follows right on the heels of the Synod. What does the timing of that tell us? What do you think that year of mercy could be used to do?
Well, there is obviously one school of thought that thinks that it's going to be it's a way of pushing through the agenda again. This whole emphasis on mercy that Pope Francis, and if you look at it, it sounds good. I mean, it's it's a field hospital. People need to be talked to with words of love and forgiveness. That's basically what this is all about, and to try and bring them into the church. But there is concern, obviously, that this is going to not evangelize people so much, and it's not going to convert them. It's just going to affirm them in the way that they're living, and it's going to draw the church into this culture of secular culture, if you like, which is obviously not what the Pope would want. But it's a big risk, but that is what the Pope is trying to do. And obviously the jury's still out on all of this, really, at the moment.
Robert Royal, the use of this holy year, this year of mercy, and will it become increasingly difficult should the decision be made, as it seems to my eye anyway, that that's the direction things are tending, that this quickie annulment process or something like it is going to be put into motion? Is that what the year is going to be used for?
There are going to be three things that happen this fall in rapid succession that are quite important. There's going to be the visit here,
which we'll be together for.
We'll be together for Washington, New York at the UN, and then in Philadelphia for the World Meeting on Families. Right after that, he'll be back for the Synod for 3/4 of October. Now, the year of mercy begins on December 8th, so it's not exactly on the heels, and in this media culture, a lot happens between, say, October 21st and December 8th. However, I think we have to say that in terms of kind of the overall cultural effect, the way that mercy is being used in this papacy, we know that mercy was a concept that John Paul II talked about a lot, and Benedict XVI, to say nothing of prior popes. It's just that mercy has come to take on a different coloration. And after a year of hearing that, I think, day in and day out from Rome, or the pulpits, various bishops, I think we're all going to feel that there's been a new coloration added to this idea of mercy, which I think is going to go in the direction. But I would like to note that in the Bible, sometimes fortune tellers are regarded as sinners, and I'm not going to make any predictions.
You're very wise, Robert. Edward, you're on the ground there in Rome. You're watching this Pope. You're listening to him every day. Recently, just a few days ago, he made that point again. We heard it late last year. about the rigorists in the church, those who are stuck to their legislative books and their rules, and that is somehow choking the church. He was, I think, comparing those figures, and I could probably rattle off a few he was thinking of. He was comparing them to the Pharisees. Your take on what that was about, and is that also an indication of the direction the Pope envisions?
I think it probably is, Raymond, but I think you've got to look at it, where he's coming from. He's coming from very much a Latin American perspective, and I think perhaps his experience is that, you know, the sort of rigorists, if you like, were or did come across as kind of Pharisaical over there, and I think that he's sort of brought that over here, and he sees that he applies that to the universal church in general. But it is something that he's obviously concerned about, but I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to say what he's trying to get at there. I mean, because there's lots of, he kind of paints a picture of lots of people like this, but then I hear people saying, well, I don't know anyone like that. I mean, the people who are doctrinally faithful, they say, well, they're not like that at all. So, you know, he may be misjudging this, I think, in some ways for a lot of Catholics, a lot of faithful Catholics.
Yeah. Before I let you both go, Robert, I'll start with you. The Vatican has come out in recent days at the UN in Geneva, making the case that now may be the time, if the need is there, to use military force against ISIS. Unprecedented? Is this a turning point?
Well, I wouldn't say that it may be unprecedented in regard to ISIS
to Francis in this moment.
In the recent years of the papacy. However, I think it's quite extraordinary that Francis, who on the way back from South Korea said that we should stop ISIS, not bomb it. He said, you know, trying to draw a distinction between what he was advocating and what the United States was doing. But now we've had Archbishop Parolin, Cardinal Parolin, saying that there should be a UN approved intervention in Libya, and more recently a Vatican spokesman at a UN meeting in Geneva talking about the same in Iraq. The Pope hasn't taken the lead on this, but I think it's significant, if not unprecedented. It's significant that even they are recognizing now that the only way to deal with this type of threat is militarily.
Edward, from the ground in Rome, what are you hearing? Is this a shift from in the Vatican position?
It's definitely a harder line shift. Yes, I think in the past they've really tried to refrain from sort of getting into all of this and advocating any kind of violence. I remember only a few months ago there's talk about Christian militias and whether the Vatican should be supporting them. But now it seems to be that you know, they to do with just war, they can justify this as saying, you know, it's in self-defense, and surely there should be some force used against
and surely
against the threat of ISIS.
the bloodshed of the Christian community throughout the Middle East is no doubt forcing them to this position. It's not a position they would have easily come to. Thank you both for being with us. You can read all of Robert Royal's incisive columns and commentary by visiting thecatholicthing.org, and our National Catholic Register Rome correspondent Edward Pentin's columns and blogs are always great reading at ncregister.com. Thank you both for being here. When we return, we'll remember the life of the incomparable Father Richard John Neuhaus with his biographer, the author of Richard John Neuhaus, A Life in the Public Square, Randy BOYAGODA. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Over many years at EWTN, there was one person, aside from Mother Angelica, who became a dear friend, a mentor, a sparring partner, and one of my favorite guests. His probing mind, his rumbling baritone, and sharp turn of phrase was irresistible. The editor and proprietor of First Things magazine, he was not adverse to controversy. In fact, he rather liked it, all of which we will explore in a moment. But first, here's a taste of the irrepressible, unpredictable Father Richard John Neuhaus.
Habemus Papam.
Habemus Papam as best we can tell.
Habemus Papam.
And there it is, the great moment. Once again, you scooped me. You
but
were
then you
very
notice I
insistent.
qualified it toward the end.
Yes, I did notice that
Yes,
little
right.
wiggle room you put in there,
exactly.
near as we can tell.
That's the kind of fellow I am. I just I don't like to say, as the recently retired Cardinal Archbishop of Washington explained the other day that on NPR, that's my idea of leadership, is that you walk right down the middle of every issue. So I quote, apparently some people find this amusing, I don't know. I'm simply quoting.
I haven't practiced mine.
I'm simply quoting His Eminence, who said that he learned this when Pope John Paul visited Newark, and then McCarrick was the Archbishop of Newark, and he noticed that the Holy Father walked right down the middle of the aisle so that the people on the left and on the right could both relate to him, and he was solidly in the middle. Now, I think this was, on the part of His Eminence, a rather unique contribution to the understanding of the character and person and pontificate of John Paul II.
Really?
That he was a man who refused to take sides.
A man of the middle. Well, we lost Father Richard John Neuhaus in January of 2009, but there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss him, his humor, his shining faith. Tonight we have an occasion to remember Father Richard. A new biography has just been released. It's titled Richard John Neuhaus, A Life in the Public Square. To explore the unseen Richard Neuhaus, the author of that biography, Randy BOYAGODA, joins me in studio. Randy, thank you for being here.
Good to see you, Raymond. Thank you.
Now, let's start with, you are a Canadian,
yes.
A university professor, an English professor, a novelist by trade. Why Richard John Neuhaus, of all subjects?
Well, you know, I think it's because, in a lot of ways, he really did have a remarkable life story. You know, a kind of a joyful life lived for God, but lived for God in really, really unexpected ways. I mean, if you think about the quotes we've just been hearing and watching, here's a man who, you know, rubbed shoulders with popes and was a major presence on national, international media, but he grew up in small-town Canada. He never finished high school. And to go from, you know, a beginning like that, motivated by a love of God and, frankly, a great deal of interest in troublemaking, you put those two things together and you get out of that a remarkable life. And so for me as a storyteller, I just saw there a life that I wanted to explore, to see what really there was to this.
One of the things I didn't realize, you relate the story of Richard being baptized by his father, Clem Neuhaus, who was also a pastor, a Lutheran priest. And yet there was this tension between he and his father. Describe that relationship. You almost spin it out to a difficulty with authority.
Yeah, well, I think I'd rather much ado. Neuhaus was the 7th of 8 children, born in Pembroke, Ontario in 1936, to a Lutheran couple from Arkansas. And his father's name was Clem Neuhaus, 6'5", 300 pounds, imposing man. And his nickname in town, for a Lutheran pastor, his nickname was Pope Neuhaus, which gives you just a sense of just how sort of grand and imposing he was.
Well, they didn't realize that title should have applied to the son.
Well, eventually, you're right. You're right. More papal than the Pope in some ways, right? So Neuhaus grows up in this world where his father is this imposing presence and also a model for him of, you know, serious-minded, rather stern pastoring. And I think Neuhaus saw this from a youngest age. His baby sister remembers when he was 4 years old, he would play church. He would set up a couple of chairs and basically preach from the back of a chair to his baby sister and her dolls. Like from the earliest point of his life, he was drawn to ministry, drawn to proclaiming the word.
Now, he and his father had a little conflict over civil rights.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we go ahead then to when Neuhaus is in seminary and then into his early years as a Lutheran pastor, he was very much committed to an idea that the church should be publicly engaged on the matters of the most pressing matters of the day when it came to defending those who could not defend themselves. And that became for him the plight of black people in America, sort of disenfranchised, discriminated against. His father had a very different view, and his view came out of a more sort of conservative view of what's called two kingdoms theology. There's the kingdom of God, the kingdom of man, a very important facet of Lutheran theology, and in a sense, never the two shall meet. Whereas Neuhaus wanted them to meet, thought it was necessary that they do, And that led to some pretty dramatic exchanges. At one point, actually, in a national convention, father and son are at two different microphones debating each other before a national group on whether the Lutheran Synod, the Missouri Synod of the Lutheran Church, should get involved with civil rights. Very dramatic.
He later, and he writes many times about the great grace of my life to have worked with Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes.
You reveal in the book that they knew each other in passing, but there wasn't the intimacy quite.
Well, it was I'd say perhaps more of a one-sided sort of affection. I mean, Father Neuhaus absolutely was involved with the civil rights movement as one of the leading clergymen of the American left.
And he knew many of the people who were working with MLK directly, and Coretta Scott King and the children.
Yeah, they sent Christmas cards. Yeah, they were close. But, you know, other than a lunch and perhaps being with him at a couple of press conferences and a couple of marches, I don't think Father Neuhaus had that direct a relationship to Dr. King. But I do think, though, that, you know, he really felt this charged experience of being connected to such a signal figure in American history. To have been close to him like that, I think, mattered to him a lot.
There was a big turn for Richard Neuhaus. He was known as a man of the left,
very much
civil rights,
anti-war
activist. And then he starts to move at a certain point in his life, not only politically, but religiously.
Yes, very much so.
He tires of the direction of Lutheranism. He told me this many times. I want to roll this little bite. This is Father Richard talking about the experience in the mid-'80s for what paved the way to his conversion to Catholicism. Listen.
But real on-the-ground Lutheranism had decided to be permanently a separated Protestant denomination. And meaning no offense to all my dear Lutheran friends who remain dear, dear brothers and sisters in Christ, I could not settle for anything less than the fullness of Catholic Christianity as embodied and most fully and rightly ordered through time in the Catholic Church.
How decisive was that moment in his life and in the life of the church itself?
Well, I think, you know, when he converted, this was national news, and, you know, people likened it to one of the most consequential conversions in American Catholic history. So it was decisive, and I think in that clip we just listened to, I think you really had a sense that he realized that the Lutheranism he was committed to, which was a Lutheranism that was internal to the Universal Catholic Church, thought itself was a reform movement, that had been abandoned, and Lutheranism instead became just another Protestant denomination, truly an ecclesial one, a conservative one, but nevertheless. And so he really did see in the church itself, in the Catholic Church itself, I should say, a fullness that he wanted to join.
Where did he meet Cardinal O'Connor, who ended up being the man who
this is a great
welcomed
story.
him into the Catholic Church? And
this will tell people so much, I think, about Father Neuhaus. So it's 1984, early on, and then Bishop of Newark, if I'm not mistaken. No, Scranton, PA. Scranton, that's right. Of Scranton, Bishop O'Connor is announced. He's the new Archbishop of New York. And he right away got in trouble because he drew a reference between the Holocaust and abortion.
I remember.
And this was a huge problem in the media, as you can imagine, in New York. And Father Neuhaus was watching, or Pastor Neuhaus then is watching this. He sends him a note and he says, look, when you come, we should talk. Let me help you out, basically. And he basically served as his consigliere, brought him into New York, and basically set up a whole series of meetings for then Archbishop O'Connor with media figures, religious figures, and the two of them hit it off right away. And that was an intensely close, almost father-son relationship. He called him his father in the faith, if I'm not mistaken. That culminated, of course, in 1990 when Father Neuhaus was received into the church in Cardinal O'Connor's chapel, and then a year later when he was ordained.
Yeah, and he reminded him at that time, Richard, I'm in charge here, not you.
Yeah, I'm the bishop. I'm the bishop.
Which was a big deal for Father Neuhaus. Tell me about the how decisive was Neuhaus's influence on a series of presidents, because his influence was certainly felt here in Washington.
Yes, absolutely. So he met with every American president from Lyndon Baines Johnson onward. He had some contact with Jimmy Carter. He had more contact still, I think, with Ronald Reagan. You know, The Naked Public Square, his most famous book, came out in the middle of the 1984 presidential election. And Neuhaus was at the Reagan White House in early 1985 giving a conference on religion and public life. And oh, guess what? He had copies for everybody.
See that sign, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. And he had some presidential appointments there. He certainly did not have a lot of positive contact with President Clinton. But then with President Bush, that was probably the most consequential interaction he had, and it had a lot to do, in fact, with articulating for President Bush positions and phrasing that would have come out of a Catholic sensibility, specifically the Catholic, John Paul's notion of the culture of life, and also this idea of abortion, this pro-life position, a child welcomed in law and protected, welcomed in life and protected in law, yes.
No, beautiful phrase that he gave George Bush.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to play something for you. This is in 1993. Father Richard nearly died.
Yes.
And while he was in the hospital, he was visited by what he called a presence, perhaps an angel. He struggled to explain it to me. Listen.
See, I was not ready to meet God in my condition, physically, spiritually, or any other way. There would need to be some preparation. In my case, probably a lot of preparation. But they were ready to escort me, to guide me through this. And it was implicit in it also was that it was my decision. I mean, everything is ready now, but it's up to you.
It's up to you. How did that change him from that moment on? Did it clarify anything for him?
Well, I think what it did was it really did bring him to a fuller understanding of the dignity of a life lived all the way through to death, right? The art of dying well comes out of the art of living well, and all of this forms a beautiful book he wrote called As I Lay Dying, which made sense of that near-death experience, that near divine life experience.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful book, and yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you owe me a beer.
It's my favorite book, and followed by Death on a Friday Afternoon.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book for this time of year as well, Raymond.
A real wonderful meditation.
Yeah.
In fact, we did an interview years ago about that book, which we're going to replay during Holy Week. I think.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, he's preaching on the 7 last words of Christ from the cross. It's a beautiful, beautiful companion for Lent.
All these years after his passing, what is the lasting imprint upon the American scene and the global scene of Richard Neuhaus? What would you say?
Well, I begin by just pointing out the number of vocations he was directly responsible for, right? Men and women religious, priests, nuns, who have their lives because of him and his model, I think. Beyond that, I think probably the very fact that we care about the place of religion in public life, that we put it in those terms, that a magazine like First Things is read widely in parishes and in policy and on campuses. This tells me that the world he created, a world that was kind of a first-person argument for why religion matters. Not if, but how religion matters in American public life. This is what he gave and what continues, I think, to matter. That
October before he died, he was at the hospital, and I couldn't find him at the house. I kept calling, he wasn't there. Went to the hospital. He was leaving. They were packing his things up at the hospital and sending him home. So I got to take him home, and we're in the cab. And I said, we've got this papal visit coming up. I hope you'll be, recovered. You can join us. Oh, no, Raymond, I think our adventures are over. I said, oh, Father Richard, come on, not over. No, you'll go on without me. And I always, that moment hits me.
Yeah,
he was great. What a lovely man, what a great man, and what a wonderful biography of him. Richard John Neuhaus, Life in the Public Square, is available at bookstores everywhere, online, and through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Randy, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure. When we return, financial advisor George SCHWARTZ is here to discuss your money and how to invest it morally in an uncertain economy. Richard would love that. The World Over Live continues in a moment, and here's a little clip of my dear friend.
Everything has been faced that needs to be faced in order to live confidently and trustingly and lovingly. That in Jesus Christ, in God's revelation in Jesus Christ, the worst that could possibly happen has already happened in the death of Christ, when the darkness overcame the light.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. One challenge all of us face: where should we be investing our money? And is there a better time to invest? Many of you sent in questions, so we brought in somebody qualified to answer all of them. He's the portfolio manager, founder, and chairman of the Ave Maria Mutual Funds and SCHWARTZ Investment Council, George SCHWARTZ. Here's our conversation. George, a lot of people try to time the market. They're trying to figure out when to get in, when to get out, when's a good time. Is that a good idea?
No, it's not, Raymond. It's a fool's errand, really. In the long run, stocks go up. In the short run, they bounce all over the place. But buying good, high-quality companies and staying with them, as Warren Buffett preaches, is really the way to do it.
What is your vision, long-term and short-term, of the market as we see it now?
I think the market has tremendous upside potential over the next 2 to 3 years. And people get scared because the market's gone up, basically tripled since March of
it's through the roof.
Yeah, but and people say, well, gee, that's Obama must be doing a pretty good job. And I say, no, the market's gone up despite Obama. Obama has done everything he can, in my view, to retard economic growth and the growth of profitable capitalism, which helps everybody. It helps the poor, it creates jobs, creates prosperity, and creates corporate profits and dividends for shareholders. But trying to do it on a short-term basis or outguess the near-term swings in the market is rather silly. I always say, if anybody tells you they can outguess the short-term moves in the stock market, they're very naive, or they think you are.
One of the two, right?
One of the two.
How can investors capitalize, if you will, on the long-term prospects for the market that you talk about? You say in the next 2 or 3 years it could explode. What should investors do?
The great Sir John Templeton, the late Sir John Templeton, used to say, any day is a good enough day to buy a good enough stock or a good enough mutual fund. And I agree with that 100%. We, of course, manage the Ave Maria mutual funds, which I think are very good mutual funds. And John Templeton used to also say, the best time to invest in a good mutual fund is when you have the money. And
it's a good principle.
Yeah, and don't try to hold back and say, well, I'm going to buy on the dip, and I'm going to buy when the market pulls back, or gee, the market looks a little high, I better wait. If you buy a good enough mutual fund or a good enough stock, you can ride with it, and you'll do very well over time.
We've gotten a lot of emails from people who have particular questions, and I want to get to those. But I want to ask some of the macro questions here. What is the right mix for an investor between stocks and bonds? Those things don't always thrive in the same marketplace.
No. Diversification is crucial to a long-term successful investment program. Historically, most advisors have said 70-30, 70% stocks, 30% bonds. But there's nothing magic about that. It's a good ratio, it's a good asset allocation as any, and I would say typically as a person gets older, they should have more in bonds and less in stocks. If they're very young, they can have more in stocks, more than 70%, 80%, 90%. There's nothing wrong with that. And so it depends on a person's investment objectives and their risk tolerance levels and their age.
Let's talk for a moment about stocks, which sank on just a week ago on Wednesday. It went for across 9 of the 10 sectors. There was a dip in stocks all across the S&P. What does this tell you, and why are you so bullish given the drop in wages? We have stagnant wages. Corporate rates are going up, stock market's going up, but the wages are stagnant. Yeah. Isn't that an incongruity?
Well, first of all, no one should worry about 1 or 2 days movement in the stock market.
Okay.
It doesn't mean anything. It's only the long term that matters. And as far as wages being stagnant, yes, they have been, and it's unfortunate. The middle class has done very poorly in the last 4 or 5 years. The investor class has done well, but I'm anticipating the economy and stocks particularly doing quite well over the next 2 to 3 years. As we get closer and closer to the day Obama leaves office, investors will be focusing on the likelihood that Obama's socialism and over-regulation of the economy will diminish or go away. And it doesn't even have to be a Republican president. If we get a Republican president in 2016, it'll be Katie bar the door, in my view. But even
President Hillary?
Even Hillary will be better than Obama by a long shot. Nobody could be worse than Obama, in my opinion, besides being the most pro-abortion president.
Why? The stock market is charging ahead, George.
But not because of him, despite him. If it wasn't for him having the government foot on the neck of capitalism, we would be at a much higher level, in my view, in terms of the stock market. Much higher.
Okay, let's talk for a moment about analysts. In December, analysts projected an 8.6% increase in corporate earnings in the first quarter of 2015. Now, the latest projection, they are predicting earnings will shrink by 2.6%. Doesn't that concern you as an investor?
It does, and I wish the economy could grow faster. The economy has been growing at a 1.5–2% rate for the last 5 or 6 years. Most post-World War II recoveries have resulted in 4 or 5 or 6% annual growth in real gross domestic product. So this has been a pitiful recovery. In my view, it's largely because of the tax policies, the fiscal policy of the Obama administration, and the unbelievable regulations, including Sarbanes-Oxley, including Dodd-Frank.
Dodd-Frank, yeah.
Including the very heavy regulation of the financial services industry, which I'm a part of.
Yeah.
But the end at the light of the tunnel is going to be visible pretty soon, and I think things could get a lot better.
Let's talk about your work. You have George SCHWARTZ Investment Group, consultant group, and within SCHWARTZ Investment Council is the Ave Maria Fund.
Right.
Why did you find the Ave Maria Fund?
My good friend Tom Monahan came to me about 12 years ago with his friend Bowie Kuhn. You knew Bowie well, I know, the former commissioner of Major League Baseball. And these two Catholic men, clients of mine, said, George, why don't you start a Catholic mutual fund? And I think I've told you this before, Raymond, but I said, well, that's fine. What is a Catholic mutual fund? You want me to invest in companies that make Bibles or rosaries or build churches? What are you thinking? And they said, no, just invest the way you always do, George, you and your staff of analysts and portfolio managers. Invest in high-quality companies, but screen out companies that support abortion and pornography. So we did that, and we put together this Catholic Advisory Board, which today includes Cardinal Maida, retired Archbishop of Detroit, as well as Lou Holtz and my friend Larry Kudlow and the great Phyllis Schlafly and several other prominent Catholics. And so they set the standards for what we should screen out.
Are those the only two things you screen for, pornography and abortion?
Abortion's the big one, and also companies engaged in embryonic stem cell research, which is closely related to abortion, and also companies that contribute to Planned Parenthood.
How far do you get into the weeds there? I mean, because look, you've got hotel chains that are solid companies, but they have SpectraVision or whatever the in-house cable offerings. They're out.
Yeah. We have 3 or 4 different screening services, commercially available screening services that we rely on. And our Catholic Advisory Board has said these are the services we should use to screen out companies. And sure, the hotel companies that show pornography on their TV screens, they're out, sure.
You call Ave Maria morally responsible investing. Is it also good, solid dollars and cents investing? Do you turn a profit?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Our long-term track record is excellent. And our two leading funds have actually produced returns of 15% compounded annually for the last 3 years. And we're very proud of that. And we are not what some people call socially responsible investors.
What's the difference?
Socially responsible investors are screening out different things, oftentimes environmental related issues. So-called social justice matters are considered. Also income inequality, or they want to invest in companies that produce affordable housing and so forth. Our screens are the ones I mentioned, and
morally objectionable.
Morally objectionable, yeah. One
things
of our
you want to cut out of your investment.
One of our Catholic Advisory Board members said, George, just screen out the mortal sins. Don't worry about the venial sins.
That's
a joke.
That's pretty good. I want to run something by you the Pope said at the top of the month. He said money is the devil's dung. Now, he was comparing money to an idol and said that it can destroy man. You would say what?
I think the Holy Father is a very holy man, and I have great respect for him, but I don't think he understands very well the benefits of capitalism. And capitalism has, as you know, Raymond, lifted literally hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, created jobs, created prosperity, created wealth, and it's a wonderful thing, the best economic system ever devised, and I hope the Pope has enough people around him that can advise him and remind him of those facts of the benefits of capitalism.
Well, I want to go through some emails now. We've gotten tons of these, people wanting investment advice, so we're going to throw some zingers at you here. You ready?
Sure.
Janet from Bethesda, Maryland asks, we're 57 and 59 and just trying to invest. How much should we put in bonds and how much in stocks? Now, there's that old equation I've seen where you deduct from 100.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Your age from 100, and
yeah.
that's what you should put in stocks. What would you say to Janet?
There's nothing wrong with that. As I said earlier, a lot depends on your temperament, your risk tolerance levels, and your age. So someone their age in their late 50s, what they should do is go talk to their financial advisor, personal financial advisor. If they want to get information on our funds, of course, they can go to our website, AveMariaFunds.com, or call our toll-free number, 866 Ave Maria, and our people can get the historical information and the background information on all our funds. But there's no secret formula, but someone that age should definitely have investments in the stock market.
Susan from Baton Rouge writes, people keep telling me I should be a compound investor. What does that even mean?
Well, compounding is a great miracle. This is a true story. Einstein was asked one time, what's man's greatest achievement? And he said, compound interest. And the power of compounding is almost unbelievable, especially if you go over a 20-year period, a 30-year period. Even a fairly low rate of return, like 6 or 7%, compounded over many years, gets to an unbelievably big number.
So explain the concept here. What is compound investing?
It's interest on the interest. Or if you start off with $100 and you get 6% interest on it, or appreciation, you got $106. The next year, if you get another 6%, it's not going to be just another $6. It's going to be more like $7 of addition. Then you're at 113, and the year after that, 6% is going to get you, past 120. It's compound interest is the power of compounding, as opposed to simple interest.
And then there's the other concept where you take a portion or all of your profits and you plow it back into the investment.
Yeah, that's reinvest your dividends and capital gains distributions. Yeah, very wise, especially if you don't need the money for living expenses.
Right, and that's also a good way, particularly if it's in a retirement account that's tax-free or tax-deferred.
Tax-deferred, yeah.
It's a better place to have it.
Absolutely.
If you're interested in finding out more about George Schwartz and morally responsible investing, visit AveMariaFunds.com or give him a call at 866 Ave Maria. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com, and you can also sign up for my free e-blast there. I'll send you exclusive news you won't find anywhere else and links to all the show segments. Now, don't miss next week's show. Pastor Rick Warren and Tom Farr will be here to talk religious freedom. And what about those Benedictine nuns back at the top of the Billboard charts? We'll get into all of it and explain why. Thanks so much for joining us. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.